Well, we spend the majority of this class on design elements in terms of visual communication. I can't, in good conscience, go through this course without addressing nonverbal cues that we see on a regular basis, especially in visual communication. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown in terms of what certain nonverbal cues might mean. And this is all very subjective. It's based on research drawn from a number of different areas. My background as a former interrogator is steeped in observing nonverbal tells. Dr. Paul Ekman was one of the primary researchers in a lot of this material that we'll be talking about. And a lot of the theory is pretty tried and tested in terms of what we're going to get into. So let's start off with that. So we're talking about kinesics, which is movement, oculesics, which is eye movement, and proxemics, how we deal with the space around us. Now, there are other nonverbal categories, but they're not visual, so I'm going to leave them out here. So let's get into this idea of kinesics. And there are four different areas here I'm going to talk about: emblems, illustrators, regulators, and adapters. Some communication scholars throw in affect displays underneath kinesics, and I take it out and treat it as its own category. So we'll get to that here in just a minute. So when the body moves, especially when it becomes escalated, it speaks volumes, and we can go through and categorize those that meaning here with emblems, illustrators, regulators, and adapters. Let's start with this idea of emblems. Emblems is something that has a cultural genesis. It comes from a cultural meaning. It could be like this sign. What does this mean to you? Does it mean okay? Does it mean I need money? Does it mean I'm looking for a prostitute? And depending on the cultural application that you might be in, the emblem's going to go through and mean a number of different things. But typically, emblems are certain nonverbal icons that we make with our hands, like the peace sign or the middle finger or something along that line, that has a very specific cultural derivation, okay, a place where it comes from. The middle finger, for example, has its own etymology in terms of where it stems from. Some believe that the middle finger comes, the display of the middle finger comes from archers in the who went into Normandy to invade France and take away their land from them. The French caught them, and instead of decapitating them at the time, they went through and cut off their middle fingers, making them completely unable to draw a bowstring, right? Think about that. It's the strongest finger, the strongest tendon you have in your arm. Without that middle finger, you wouldn't be able to draw that bow. And there were some archers who escaped without their middle fingers being cut off. And in their escape, they turned to their running captors and they flipped them the bird, saying, "I'll be back." and, and now that emblem culturally has morphed into something a little bit more obscene, but I think you get the idea. Let's move on to illustrators. Illustrators illustrate what it is that we're trying to say. Okay? In Toy Story, for example, when Buzz and Woody are having that argument underneath the pizza truck at the gas station, and Woody turns to Buzz and he goes, "You are a toy. You are a child's plaything." That's what he's doing with his fingers right there, right? He's illustrating how small he really is. And we illustrate a lot, and depending on, again, on our cultural influences. Some people illustrate more than others. Some cultures illustrate more than others. People in Miami illustrate more than people in Fargo. The reason why is because it's cold in Fargo, and most folks have their hands in their pockets, right? And the same thing in northern and southern Italy. Sicilians have a tendency to be more illustrative, where northern Italians aren't. So if illustrators illustrate, then regulators write, right? They regulate. We regulate communication. And it's not just the hands that do this. We regulate communication, making eye contact. We can do it with our body, either opening our body to somebody or closing it off, turning a shoulder and regulating, I'm done talking to you kind of a thing. But our hands are also good regulators. Next time you're in an argument with somebody and you want to shut them up, just point at them. That regulator will shut them down, okay? Unless they're kind of weird that way, and who knows. But we regulate communication with these kinds of turn cues using these types of nonverbal signs, these regulators. You hold the hand up, it means stop, I'm not listening to you. Or we can wave the person on and say, go ahead, continue, I'm listening, to go through and you get the idea, the ebb and flow of how we speak. The fourth category here is a little, on the surface, it seems like it's just an action that takes care of a physical need. You got an itch, you're going to go through and scratch it, or maybe covering your mouth when you cough or something like that. But through study of nonverbal cues, they were finding that adapters might indicate many different things, including escalation of physiological behaviors. For example, when women especially become escalated, there's that endocrine dump that's happening. Adrenaline hits the system, and a side effect of that, happening more so in women than men, is that it makes their faces itch. And if they start to scratch that face, well, I would say we're talking and I'm deposing you, and you become escalated and you start to itch your face. Chances are you won't notice it, but the itch doesn't go away, and you might start scratching and itching some more. So what started off as just a simple adapter now becomes indicative that your endocrine system is full of adrenaline because you are afraid of the situation that you're in, or you're afraid that you're at risk, and so your body's responding a certain way. There are dozens of other types of adapters that on the surface level look like they're just trying to take care of a need, but go a little deeper and give it some context, and they become a lot more significant. Oculesics is next, and this deals with eye movement, okay, or the eye behavior, and this certainly is a very visual communicative artifact. Here we look for meaning in each other's eyes, either understanding or comprehension, or are you still listening, or whatever the case might be. There's three different areas here that we can get into. The first one is eye movement, how the eyes dart about and what they mean. Do they go up, upper left, upper right? Are they moving around, flitting, or are they locked on in that kind of alpha male stare? Then we get into indexing. This is something I teach with my law enforcement classes, is when we're dealing with a subject, if we come into a domicile and we're making contact with that subject, where are their eyes going in the room? Are they indexing where they might have stashed a weapon, or where they might have put something else? It's how those eyes move, and if they move back to the same area over and over again, it becomes an indexing. So that movement becomes pretty significant as far as that goes. And then the eyelids as well, if they start blinking more rapidly, or if they start to slow down in terms of their blinking. Either way, either an accelerated or a decelerated blink rate goes through and becomes indicative of some level of an attempted control of their facial expressions, or that physiologically they're escalating. The slowed down blink rate, or the alpha male stare, is a dangerous indication that the person has made up their mind that they're going to stand up against whatever it is that you might be doing within that. So all of these need to be done with some level of baselining, meaning we have to kind of get a sample in terms of how is this person responding in their eye behavior under normal conditions, as opposed to then being deposed in an interrogation room, or by an employer, an employee, or whatever the case might be, in order to pull any kind of meaning out of that. And there are other physical attributes that factor into this. For example, relative humidity will go through and mess with your baseline in terms of how many times we might be blinking within a given minute. If we're doing this in St. George, where it's awfully dry, we're blinking more often because the eyes dry out quicker. Okay, if we do this in a humidity-controlled room of 68% humidity, then we can get a better baseline in terms of its blink rates, and then see if they accelerate or decelerate in terms of what's happening as far as questioning is concerned. I know it's a little weird, but the last area here deals with pupil dilation. Okay, and boy, that's got a story in and of itself. So let me break these out a little bit. Eye movement. There's kind of a funky little theory that has been in, gosh, how do I say this? That has been in the interrogative arts for a long time, and they were just disproven here about 3 years ago. And that is, if the eyes move one direction or another, it might be indicative of what side of the brain they're going on. I found this illustration here that there was a thought, an idea that the brain divided, in left hemisphere, right hemisphere. So the left hemisphere was responsible for the analytical side of things, and the right side was for the more creative sides of things. And so if you were questioning somebody and you asked them, where were you last Tuesday night? And their eyes happen to go up to the left, remember, the optic nerve is switched, okay? And so that being the case, if the eyes go up to the left, it means that they're accessing, okay, the right side or the creative side of the brain, meaning that they're making it up. If they go to the right, meaning it's going to the left side of the brain, it's getting into data that already exists, that's already been filed away. Wow, what a great theory, right? We can put a lot to that. The problem is not everybody is left brain analytical and right brain creative. Okay, in fact, we're finding that there is no pattern there. That, in fact, much of the population have a mix happening between left and right brains and left and right lobes in terms of how they're looking and storing and curating information and where that goes on. So suddenly now the theory doesn't really hold much sway. It's fascinating. Here's an advertisement by Mercedes-Benz that still capitalizes off this whole idea, only to find out really it's a bunch of crap. Indexing, I already kind of got ahead of myself here. Here we have our perpetrator. I use this couple in training for my law enforcement de-escalation classes that I do, and they're completely innocent, okay? But as we approach this guy in the video, we see his eyes start to flit around. We see him start to index throughout the room that he might be abusive with the girlfriend, or he might have a weapon stashed over in the couch someplace, or something that's going on with that. Indexing is fascinating to me because people, when they become escalated, they lose their critical ability to stay in control of what the eyes are doing. And when the eyes start flitting around a room, around a domicile, and they go back to the same place over and over and over again, that's the first place to start looking. Eyelids. If the eyes are the windows to the soul, the eyelids are the curtain, certainly. While Bill Clinton was a poster child of eyelid behavior in his deposition that was happening during the Monica Lewinsky deal, he would get real squinty-eyed, and then his eyes would open up really wide. And then these are indications of, well, if I squint, you won't be able to see that I'm lying, or if I go, again, that alpha male stare, I'll keep my eyes open as wide as I possibly can, and then you won't think that I'm lying, which is an indication that you're lying, right? Not too long ago, we had this guy running for president. And the guy, Ben, love him, okay, but he just couldn't keep his damn eyes open in a press conference, in an interview with like on Meet the Press, or he just couldn't keep his eyes open. And as a result, even though he's this renowned surgeon and this real smart guy, and now he's the head of housing and urban development, he was hard for the public to trust him because he wouldn't open his eyes. All kinds of myths around constricted and dilated pupils. And there's not a lot there to be proven here. There's a baseline, though, that we've been able to go through and study and get some data on. Our eyes, all our eyes, between the genders, male and female, the sexes that way, our eyes dilate under the same condition. That is a physiological condition. When the lights go out, our pupils dilate, okay, to go through and compensate exposure, to bring in more light. If you've ever sat in a Saturday afternoon matinee in a movie theater, then you went outside into the bright sunshine, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it takes a while for your pupils to go through and constrict in order for you to go through and pull exposure, all right? So those are the same common conditions under which our eyes, under which our pupils dilate. Men, their pupils dilate under different conditions than women do outside of the physiological. When men get angry, the pupils dilate, or when they're put back into a corner, put on the defensive, the pupils dilate. and I think they dilate to gather in more data, more information in order to respond. It's kind of the fight or flight type of response kind of thing. Women, your eyes dilate under the condition of fear. Okay, I think also for that same type of defense mechanism and pulling in as much data as possible. But there are two other conditions under which women's eyes dilate where men's eyes don't. And these are general rules. Okay, there are no absolutes. But the first condition under which women's pupils dilate is when they lie. Wow. Which is fascinating because technically women are better liars than men are, okay, because they know how to make relationships with the words that they're using and how to become convincing with that. But because women are relational, they also, generally speaking, feel bad when they do lie. And as a result, that guilty feeling, that feeling bad, goes through and dilates the pupils. Okay. Now, again, not all women are like this. I had a subject who did horrific things, who had perfect eye control in what was going on in terms of her deposition. It was made my veins, my blood run cold in my veins. Women's pupils dilate under one other condition, and that's when they are sexually aroused. Look at most of your modeling magazines out there and see these models with dilated pupils. And they're photographed that way on purpose. They use low wattage modeling lamps, and then when they release a shutter, 1,000 watts of light flashes, capturing that dilated pupil. Hasn't had a chance to go through and constrict yet, right? Because they don't work that fast. We're attracted to the dilated pupil. It's a sensual thing that way, okay? Which clears up a mystery, really, with this whole idea of men are from Mars and women are from Venus, because women send the same signals if they're turned on or if they're lying. Okay, next category, proxemics. And this has to do with three different areas of study in terms of what we put around us: artifactual proxemics, territorial proxemics, and spatial proxemics. Now this has to do with stuff, okay, that we have and where we put stuff and what kind of distances we have with things, and so it becomes very visual in that respect. Artifactual communication is just that. It's the way you wear your hair, it's your makeup, it's the structure of your face. It might be a piercing or two, or a tattoo, or it might be it's all kinds of things. Okay, and socially, depending on our construct and our context, socially and culturally, it means something entirely different. We use artifacts to go through and express ourselves, to go through and indicate certain statuses, or to go through and maybe, who knows, right? But they're all over the place, and we're using them to go through and communicate something about us. One of the axioms of communication is you cannot not communicate, and one of the reasons why is because of those artifacts that are going on. Territorial proxemics deals with what we do with the space that's around us, not necessarily like this and claiming our territory, but more like this, in terms of this is my side, this is my stuff, this is my side of the closet, my side of the vanity, my side of the garage. If you're in any kind of dyadic relationship, chances are you are territorial, okay? And what you do with that territory, how do you go through and decorate it? What does that mean? What does that say about you? It says volumes, if you know how to go through and interpret that. The third area then being the space that we have between us, and that communicates a lot. There are different types of spaces. We have here we have a public space, which is this more nonverbal communication happening here, anywhere by 12 feet or so. Here we have social space, but you can see he's kind of encroaching in on her, right? Getting into maybe more personal space because we see her actually resisting what's going on. The definition of social space is that if the individuals were to touch, like shake hands, it would have to be done upon some type of a mutual decision to go through and do so, right? We all know people, or we might be people where we don't like our space encroached upon, right? And then we have personal space to intimate space, where we have some kind of where we are touching, and usually we're within a relationship that allows us to do that. Now, all three of these dyads that you're seeing here have three very different meanings to them, right? In terms of what they're visually communicating, and depending on our frame of reference that we're bringing into this, we can go through and extrapolate three different, really different types of meaning with that. All right. I told you I'd talk about affect displays, and this is I'm going to wrap it up with this. Ekman gets into affect displays, Paul Ekman, and he calls them, he gets into what are called micro expressions. And for anybody involved in the interrogative arts, these are the most critical of cues that we're looking for, because they are really the truest expression of what's going on. Now, a micro expression is something that breaks through an otherwise stoic or an otherwise made up expression on somebody's face, okay? And they go through and express a real basic set of emotions like anger, fear, surprise, happiness, sadness, disgust, and lastly, this one of contempt, okay? They look something like, there's a neutral in here as well, a base emotion, which I didn't put in, but basically the face is stoic. Some people don't have a neutral. Their resting face might not be just calm, cool, collected kind of a thing. It might default to something a little bit more harsh, okay? Unlike language that's used to express emotions, microexpressions are universal in culture. Okay, Ekman's research discovered that primates and other mammals have universal signals for emotions. For humans, these emotions are identified as these here, as happiness, anger, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, and contempt. If you have a golden retriever, you see these. Okay, my dogs go through and do these. They look something like this. Okay, nothing unfamiliar. We know what they are. We get into them. The worst one of these, though, is this one. And when I get into teaching in law enforcement, de-escalation, and threat assessment, this is one I train officers to go through and recognize the most immediate, because it's the one that indicates that the subject's concern for anybody else around them, including the officer, has evaporated. Okay, it's contempt. And it looks like this. It's an asymmetrical look where part of the face, okay, it's not balanced. We have the curled lip that goes up, the eyes go dead, we lose any kind of crow's feet that way. And again, it pops through at a 30th of a second, but it becomes indicative that this person doesn't care at all for you anymore and would rather remove you from the situation than go through and continue to engage. Wow. So that's a lot of information to throw at you. Hopefully, maybe you'll go through and watch the video a couple more times, take some notes, maybe start to recognize what's going on around you. What's interesting is for about half the population, okay, about half of people paying attention do this relatively accurately, about 80% of the time do it innately. The other half have no idea. I'm not sure where you fall into that. There are some people, though, who are wizards at this, who have a very high rate of accuracy in going through and being able to determine all of these nonverbal tells and apply them to what this individual might be thinking or doing, or how they might be lying, or how they might be telling the truth.